Welcome everyone to my second episode now in the Tech Talk series, where I'm being joined by some expert guests within the cryptography realm. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Yehuda, who is head of cryptography at Coinbase. So without further ado, we'll get stuck in straight away. If you could, Yehuda, just a bit of an intro into I guess yourself and a little bit about your sort of role at Coinbase at the moment.
Thank you very much, and glad to be here. So a bit about myself. My background is a purely academic background, actually. I went straight from my undergrad to my master's, to my PhD, to my postdoc. Never had a real job. I spent 15 years in academia doing research on MPC. Started researching MPC in 1998. So that's like 27 years ago.
Can I interrupt already? Intrigued to know, where was MPC at that point? Was that a super new technology that no one had touched, or was that slowly becoming more and more prevalent?
So it was in its real infancy, even theoretically. So I guess the first paper that talked about MPC would have been in 1987. You could maybe trace some earlier things, but in the 80s, there was some very specific things looked at. Towards the late 80s, first real hardcore MPC papers, you could call them, pure theory. The definitions were not quite stable yet. There was a lot of work on the definitions in the 90s and early 2000s as well. So it was like really pure theory, nothing that we were ever sure that anybody would ever use. But it was like a very well-motivated notion conceptually, very interesting to look at. It was very early to be there, although I sort of felt like I missed the boat, like I got in late. In hindsight, I didn't. There wasn't much written about it, like not many full proofs. So my advisor was Oded Goldreich, and he was one of the first people also to look at it. And he'd written a manuscript, the first like full proof of something in the MPC space, and I spent a lot of time reading and rereading it, and then sort of got into it, just like so yeah, it's sort of like I work with people who are younger than some of the papers that I have. A bit strange.
I mean, if you were to cast your mind back then, I mean, do you remember some of the first concepts that you were researching, and I guess some of the theories about how they could potentially one day be implemented? Do you remember?
Yes, I get a couple of directions in the very early days. First, I did my master's in data mining. So it turns out if I hadn't gone into crypto, I would have been in AI. So.
It's always one of the two nowadays.
But back then, it certainly wasn't. Like, when I did my PhD, it was like, okay, if you don't get a job in academia, what are you going to do with your life? Because there's nothing to do with cryptography. Almost like. But so I actually did I think my first paper in my PhD was with another PhD student at the Weizmann, and it was called Privacy Reserving Data Mining, and we showed how you could do MPC, or two-party computation actually, to learn a decision tree without revealing information. So it was like sort of exploring whether you could do, it wasn't a very strong model, but back then it was like, could you actually potentially do something real with this technology? But most of my research was around the feasibility and infeasibility of securely computing in a setting with concurrency. So the idea is that until then, like the first 15 years or so of MPC, people mainly focused on a setting where you sort of run one protocol and that's it. Or maybe you run it one after the other sequentially, and then you can prove that it's okay. What happens if I'm running many different protocols and they all sort of maybe have related inputs or secrets, and they run at the same time, and the adversary can somehow schedule things badly? And it turns out a lot of the techniques that we're using until then just didn't work anymore. So there's this new definition at the time called universal composability, and I had a lot of research on what you could or couldn't do in that setting, how you could do it. So it was really foundational stuff, like what we call feasibility, very close to sort of pure math rather than actual something which is practical. We started really thinking about this in a more practical level 2007, 2010. 2007 I had the first paper that sort of looked at trying to do it with what we called concrete efficiency. So it's not just theoretical efficiency. You could actually do it in theory, but actually, could this actually run on a real computer?
Yeah.
And then it sort of slowly became more and more and more and more and more efficient. And then, So back to my background. So purely academic, but I did do consulting. It was like one day a week or once every second week. I was consultant for a company that was building smart cards and authentication solutions. And so I had an idea about what you needed to build a product in industry. And then in 2014, I had this idea that what we're doing in MPC is actually efficient enough to actually protect cryptographic keys. And the space that we were thinking about was, for banks or maybe high-end technology companies who want to protect their keys, and they're maybe protecting them today inside hardware and what they call HSMs, hardware security modules, which are very challenging. They don't scale well. They don't behave very nicely with each other. Most people I know who work with HSMs hate them. Like they just, you want to work in software, everything's going virtual, but suddenly you have these physical boxes that don't scale, that you can't move around, that work with very legacy software and are hard to update because they have to be FIPS approved, and the process with NIST takes forever. And so that was sort of like the idea, and we co-founded a company called Unbound Security. Actually, it was called a few different names in the beginning, but in the end, Unbound Security. And that's what we did. And most of our customers were actually large banks and technology companies, some of the biggest banks in the world. And we had about 20% of our income in the cryptocurrency space. And Coinbase liked what we were doing, and they bought us for that. So in early 2022, or end of 2021, we joined Coinbase to take our technology and build the ultimate vault or key management system to protect Coinbase's assets under management, which are today, I'm not sure exactly, $400, $500 billion. A lot of money.
Yeah.
So that's our mandate. That's what we do. That's what I do now. So I'm lead the cryptography team, which is we're a group of 5 people, all PhDs in cryptography, a lot of expertise in MPC. And we work with engineering, we work with product to build out this vault. And
yeah, a super interesting journey. So, I mean, a couple of questions to unpick from that, and I'm sure there'll be plenty more to follow up. But when was the first time that you put theory into production? Was that at Unbound? Obviously, you mentioned loads of theory and the mathematics behind it, and obviously your background in academia. But when was the first time that you ultimately started to build something? I know you're obviously from a cryptography background, and there are probably engineers that did that. But when did your first sort of theory move into production, and how was that?
So in production, it certainly wasn't in Unbound. But it was a bit of it was a process, because my research in academia, I started as a pure theoretician. So implementing something like I did in my master's. And my wife is also a software engineer. When in my master's, I had to actually implement what I'd done. And after I implemented and run experiments, she said, but didn't you really like the fact that you can see that it actually works? And I said, yeah, but it would be just as even better if someone else wrote that part, and I just did the algorithms. So I was certainly a very hardcore theoretician, interested in the concepts and proving theorems. But then it became interesting to see, again, as I said, can we actually make this work in reality? So actually a long series of papers where there was the cryptographic design of a new MPC protocol, which is more efficient. And actually in my research lab, we had a team of engineers, actually a few engineers, who would implement. And we could make comparisons, and we actually implemented. So we were implementing, it's not production, but we were actually implementing protocols to see how efficient they were. There's often very surprising things, because cryptographers, or at least at the time, it was clear to everyone that what's really expensive is the cryptographic operations, the asymmetric cryptographic operations, and everything else doesn't cost anything. And it turns out in real life, it's not always the case. So we had one protocol where we had this had this thing where you wanted to generate lots and lots of stuff, and you wanted to randomly shuffle it and choose and open some of them. And if you open some of them and they were all correct, then you could assume that the rest were also correct. That was like the way the protocol worked. And then to have really high efficiency, it turns out if you have like a huge number of them, then that what we call cut and choose, where you commit to a whole lot and open a subset and then use the rest, that if you had a whole lot, the combinatorial parameters came out much better. You get much better efficiency. So like this massive like array of like millions, and the protocol didn't seem like it was fast, but it wasn't to our expectations. We ran a profiler, and it turned out that the longest operation was doing this random shuffle of this massive array because of all of the cache misses that we're getting in memory. It wasn't a cryptographic thing at all. So we learned a lot about implementing and optimizing MPC protocols in that time, but nothing to do with production.
Yeah.
And in Unbound, it was the first time that, of course, I didn't write code. Nobody lets me write code. The last time I wrote code was in my master's in 1997. But certainly I can read code and I can work with engineers, and it's, there's something very different about research when you're in production. And the way I like to explain the difference is as follows. So in academia, I think that academia and industry firstly have very different roles. I'm not a believer in this thing that academia is there to solve industry's problems today. I think industry's problems today should be solved by paying people to go and solve those problems, and academia's role is to push science forward for 10, 15 years later. If no one had worked on MPC 30 years ago, we wouldn't have it today. So in academia, you need to publish a paper, you need to push science forward. So you need to find a question which is just right. If it's too easy, then it's too easy. You won't publish it. If it's too hard, then you won't solve it. So you sort of play around with the question to get something which is scientifically novel, but sort of you know how to solve, and you work on it. And it's so that's what you do. And in industry, it's like you have a product need, and you have to solve that. So I'll give you an example. In the early days in Unbound, we wanted to do ECDSA signing. And the best protocol was like a few hundred milliseconds long. And we wanted it for like an HSM replacement. We need to get this down to like 20 milliseconds or something like that. And so I was researching on this. I was working on it, and I worked on it for a long time, and I got it down for 300 milliseconds. I'm just making up the numbers now. I don't remember exactly. 250. And I go back to like my co-founder VP R&D and saying, I got it down to half the time. Now, as a research project in academia, this would be great. You can publish this. That's like a big improvement. It's like, but 150 is too long. So I go back, work on it more. When I come back, I got it down to 80 milliseconds. 80 milliseconds is too long. I work on it more and more and more and more until I finally got to something that we're all happy with. So it's a different mindset when you're building for production. Sometimes not just performance. Sometimes, in fact, nowadays, very often they say, we don't care about performance. In the cryptocurrency world, it usually doesn't matter if it's a few hundred milliseconds versus tens of milliseconds for that application. But we want to do different things to meet product needs. And then you have to solve that. It's not good enough to say, oh, that's too hard. Who cares?
Yeah.
Work on it.
I mean, you've led us on perfectly. So you mentioned about these novel things and these theories that ultimately ended up in Unbound, which I believe you were part of the founding team. So what were these novel ideas that you put into production? You touched upon some of them there, but ultimately, what was Unbound and what were you working on?
Right. So what Unbound did was we built a library, essentially. Software, not SaaS, believe it or not. We built an B2B, not hardcore security. When goes well with our age. So we built a series of MPC protocols and implemented them that would support the full standard cryptographic API. So you want to do RSA or ECDSA or AES encryption, HMAC. All of those, just like a standard cryptographic library, but instead of having the key in one place, it's split between two. We did in two, you could do more, but at that time we did two. And you could have two main configurations. One where the two was two servers, and then you would use that like as an HSM replacement. So we had one bank in Europe who had deployed 3 pairs, one in their data center, between their data center and AWS, another one between AWS and Azure, another one between Azure and their data center. So the idea is you would have to actually you would have good redundancy. Even if one of the 3 went down, you would still be able to operate. You'd have to break into 2 completely different environments, like Azure and the bank's data center, or Azure and AWS, in order to learn anything, which is very, very difficult. You have really, really strong separation. That was one configuration that we had. And another was where you could have one server working an MPC with many clients, and then you could use that like as a smart card replacement. So we had one big bank who was using that for all of their customers' mobile logins. So when you want to log in, they wanted to increase the functionality of what you could do on mobile, how much you would be able to transfer and things like that, but they couldn't get comfortable with mobile security and the different solutions. And with us, they felt comfortable. And so we were able to actually, really help them grow their mobile business, and with security still being happy. And and I thought like, okay, so I just need a few cryptographic basic protocols to support this API, and then I'll be done. And turns out there's always more to do. So there's a lot of cryptography to do. At some point, also 4 years in, I found myself taking over as CEO, and that was a whole other story. Like that was from academic to CEO. But now I'm back to doing cryptography, and it's a similar idea, but it's in the cryptocurrency space. It's very different. It's much more complex than like a pair of servers, because the losses are immediate and irreversible and massive. So here we typically have many more participants and of different kinds interacting with each other. So.
And I mean, you touched upon it a little bit just then and further back, but obviously at Unbound, you mentioned around 20% of your work was in the crypto space, and then along came Coinbase knocking on your door. So first of all, I guess, how did that come around, and what was the crypto application of what you were working on at Unbound at that point?
So let me start with the second question, then come back to the first.
Yeah, sorry, I bombarded you there.
So, no, just in terms of, because it's logically. So if we start with what we're doing in the cryptocurrency space, we had a product that enabled you to take your signing keys for Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever, and split them between servers and human devices, which could be mobiles or laptops. And you would actually have to break into all of those in order to bypass the system. So you'd be able to get really strong protection of the keys. You could also have very strong policy enforcement, because you can't just get into a single machine and then carry out the instruction. Sometimes people think about key protection. I want to protect my key and make sure nobody steals it from this machine. Let's say I could do that. So I have this perfect hardware box that no one can steal the key from, but then there's another machine who comes and queries that hardware box to carry out the to generate the signature and carry out the transaction. If I can break into that machine, then that's all I need. Well, I don't need to steal your key. I just need to sign with your key saying to transfer all of your money to me. That's all I need. So this, by having the key distributed in many different parties of different kinds, you could also enforce those policies at all those different machines. We actually had one customer whose entire IT infrastructure was taken over by attackers. Their entire IT infrastructure. So the attackers had owned all of their machines, but they still couldn't do anything because parts of the keys were on users' mobiles, and that was different infrastructure. So that was nice. I mean, it wasn't nice for them, but it was nice that it proved the value of the value of that. And Coinbase was looking at an MPC technology, and at the time already, it was clear that it's a really great fit for the space. So if you want to protect keys, it's just it really gives you the most power and flexibility to split keys amongst any number of parties you want, and You can switch employees in and out, and really have great flexibility and great separation between the different types of platforms that people have their key shares on. So you don't want to put everything in one place, because then if there's a 0 day on that infrastructure, you're sort of dead. And with MPC, you can really just play around with it and set it to. And then after a couple of conversations they had with me just generally about MPC and how can one build MPC expertise, and I talked to them. About a year later, they just sort of came knocking on the door. We were fine. We weren't looking to sell or anything. We were happy building. They knocked on our door, and gave us an offer that we couldn't refuse.
Yeah. And I know when we've spoken before, you mentioned it was more about the acquisition of the technology and being able to implement that at Coinbase. How was that transition, and was it as easy as implementing what you'd done previously, just at a new firm, maybe a slightly larger scale? How was that?
So it's very different, because in a startup you sort of you're building a certain product, you're selling that very specific product, and you're not responsible for building everything on top of that. In that sense, it's a little bit easier. It's a little bit harder because you're building a general product. You sell them to many different customers. But the system that we're building at Coinbase, firstly, yes, we're much more aware of how it's actually being used, and we're responsible for that as well. So that adds complexity. And the scale is huge, right? This is major impact. We're protecting hundreds of billions of dollars. It's not all on our system yet, but it's moving there very quickly. So protecting hundreds of billions of dollars is yes, it's an amazing challenge and great impact. And the transition is, moving from a startup to a larger, more established company always has some challenges, but by and large, I think that it's been a very, very successful acquisition, in the sense that we're very deeply embedded in Coinbase's infrastructure today, and we're an integral part of the team. So I'm very happy with the journey.
Yeah, there's a question there that I'll save a little bit for later, because I don't want to get ahead of myself. But you've been focusing on sort of key management systems, or as you told me, you like to call it sort of key protection systems. So what is it actually that you're working on? You touched upon it a little bit there, but in a little bit more depth, what you've been sort of working on your cryptography team over the last few years?
Yeah, so key management versus key protection is always a little bit vague, because there are some key management systems that really talk about the management aspects, right? Like inventory of keys, policies around keys, all those sort of things, allocating keys to certain use cases and customers, and that's actually important, both for just good management, but also it's also important for security. But that's not the focus of what we're doing now. We did actually a lot of that at Unbound as well. We had both aspects. Right now, we're much more focused on the key protection side, which is how do you make sure that nobody steals the key. But as I mentioned before, not just nobody steals the key, that the key is not misused. So you don't have a problem with key misuse. How do you make sure that you're able to also verify that the transaction that you're requested to ask for is legitimate? And our focus is really on building what you want to call it, a zero trust type system, or no single point of failure or compromise type system. We very much want a system that no single insider, or no small groups of insiders, or no external attacker who is able to corrupt some part of the system is able to do anything. So we have a system that has servers that participate in the MPC, that has employee devices participating in the MPC, that has even offline elements participating in the MPC. And we have a significant number of these with strong separation between them. And then we do the whole gamut of from key generation to signing, whether it's again ECDSA or EDDSA or whatever is needed. There are other different cases as well. supporting whatever assets that Coinbase supports. A backup is a very, very big thing. I always tell people that there's only one thing worse than having your money stolen, and that is if you lose all of your money. That's even worse. And so we have something which is we call it publicly verifiable encryption, and it's an encryption scheme that essentially comes together with zero knowledge proof that you can look at it and know that the ciphertext encrypts the correct value without decrypting to check. So classically, if you want to back up all of your asset keys, every now and then you want to check that they're actually correct. So maybe you'll go and decrypt a few and verify that the private key inside the ciphertext is actually what you expect it to be. But that adds a lot of risk and danger, because why are you suddenly now opening up a private key? You don't want to do that. You don't want to touch your backup. So if I give you the ciphertext with a zero knowledge proof that what's inside this ciphertext is actually the private key associated with that public key, and you can just verify that publicly, and that's also something which is very important. So the system has many of these different additional things as well. It has distributed policy verification. So we have signed attestations coming from different sources that every participant verifies before agreeing to sign. What else? Yeah, I think it's a pretty big system in itself, the fact that it can do all of that.
Yeah.
And because it's MPC, it can support many, many different use cases as well. So whether it's custody or a non-custodial setting, you can have that by having either all of the MPC participants inside Coinbase, or you can have them split between Coinbase and the customer. You can have a very fast hot wallet type thing, but with MPC, rather than having everything in one machine by using only servers, then you have a more robust system that maybe takes a bit more time because it has these humans that also need to participate from their laptops, and then they need to be connected, or at least a quorum need to be connected. And you have this offline element that can also participate. So you can really choose to tailor it to the product that you're building, the level of security versus speed that you need for that product.
You touched upon zero knowledge there. Obviously, a lot of your, by the sounds of it, a lot of your systems are underpinned by MPC, but you mentioned zero knowledge. Are there other schemes or tools or protocols such as ZK that you're looking to utilize more significantly? You touched upon encryption as well, whether that's FHE, I don't know, on the hardware side, TE, anything like that you're sort of exploring in more depth, and things that you might be utilizing?
So I'll give the answer to. Firstly, zero knowledge is a general notion that is used in many places in MPC as well. It's a tool that we use in MPC as well, not necessarily something that stands alone, but basically in MPC, sort of the general way you build protocols is that you come up with a protocol that is secure as long as everybody behaves nicely. So as long as you behave nicely, nothing about our input is revealed to each other. And that is, by the way, in itself is not that easy to do. It might sound like it is, but if you behave nicely, then you just won't tell anyone. No. So you won't tell anyone. It's actually, you can prove that nothing leaks. So if you look at everything that you get, you won't be able to learn anything. But sorry to say, but I don't trust you. So you might be corrupted, because that's the whole model that we're talking about, where some of the parties are corrupted. So now we want to force you to behave nicely. Well, think about what's the best way that I can force you to behave nicely without revealing anything. It's called zero knowledge proof. We use it very often in MPC as well. But there are certainly other technologies that we use, and also others in the company. In terms of TEs, one of the things that we're looking at now is running the MPC participants as servers themselves inside TEs. Personally, I don't believe that trusted execution environments are very good as a primary security solution. SGX and AMD, the confidential computing, and sure, all of these have been shown to be very leaky as far as cryptography goes. It's not that it's extremely easy to attack, but if you have the expertise, then it's been shown to be attacks are very, very, very effective. And when you're talking about protecting billions of dollars, then that's the assumption. The assumption is that people have the expertise and can do that. So I wouldn't want to use a TE as the primary security mechanism. But it's a secondary one where, for example, I'm running MPC, and that MPC participant is itself inside a TE. So even if you attack them, you only get one share, and then attacking them, of course, is much, much harder. That's something which I like a lot as a model. So we're looking at that. There are other parts of the business that are looking at TEE for more like lightweight type of wallet things, but not the heavy, large amounts we're thinking about. And zero knowledge certainly is something that, for example, Base is looking at with right now. It's a pure optimistic roll-up, but that may change. Certainly looking at ZK there, and for privacy applications. So there are many different things happening. Yeah, future is, we have an exciting future ahead of us.
Yeah. And one of the questions I was holding back was, obviously from an engineering perspective, for example, when you're dealing with scale, whether it's a, the volume of assets you were discussing, or the volume of data, the number of users, clearly there are engineering challenges that you need to sort of overcome. Is it the same from a cryptographic perspective? Do you need to change the way you operate, the theory, the maths behind a cryptographic system that's going to be used at such scale?
So I think it's just really a question of what you need to optimize for. So the fact that it's a large amounts of money doesn't necessarily mean that it's a large volume of transactions.
Yeah.
So then it's a matter of your security design on how you apply your MPC to make sure you get extremely high security, because these are very large amounts. But if you're talking about something which needs to do many transactions very quickly, then you need to start asking, okay, how many rounds of communication do you have? How much compute do you have? How much bandwidth do you have? And you can often trade these things off in MPC protocol design. I can say something like, if you don't mind me having more bandwidth, then I'll be able to be faster, or vice versa. But in the cryptocurrency space, top performance is typically not a real issue. We don't have a massive number of transactions that we need to do per second. Like in Unbound, when you were supporting millions of bank customers doing login, then obviously the server needs to be able to support a very large number of operations. Or you're doing HSM replacement operations for database decryption, then you might need to do, if you're doing record by record, you might have to have very support for very high TPS. But it's usually, at least not in the use cases that we're looking at, it's typically not an issue. Doesn't mean that it's never an issue. If you're doing a consumer wallet, then you want to make sure that the performance is good enough. But it's very rare these days that the performance is going to be a problem because of the MPC. So if you're doing two-party for a consumer wallet, you can do ECDSA in tens of milliseconds with only 2 round trips. This is not going to be something which is a problem. The question is, what else is happening around there as well by the time you need to go to the blockchain and other things. So I don't say it's never a problem, but it's not the biggest problem. The main issues are, how do we really build the functionality out that will support this very secure and robust key management system, but that's also is able to support a good withdrawal time. I'll give you an example. Coinbase used to have an SLA of like 24 hours or something for custody, and I think I'm not sure about what the SLA is these days, but the average signing time is down to minutes. So, and how is that possible? Because of having the additional security around the system that we've built, you're able to change other things and get the time much down to be much faster. So it's not just about making it more secure; it's making it more secure while actually meeting the business needs.
Awesome. I mean, there's one final question. I mean, your team and yourself obviously, works on the cryptography that underpins the entirety of Coinbase's system. So what exciting things have you got lined up? What can we expect to see? If there's anything you could share, what you're working on over the next few months, 6 months, 12 months, is there anything in store that you can share?
Oh, what can I tell you about that? These are always the questions that I have I'm challenged with. So one of the things that we're looking at now, and we haven't announced yet, but we will not too distant future, is to have MPC protocols where an offline element is actually an active participant in the MPC and not doing something partial. And that's cryptographically, from a research side, is very challenging. I'm not sure if I can. Well, I'll give you one example of why. So this type of offline system, firstly, has to interact very little with the rest of the system. And secondly, we very much want it to be stateless, because otherwise it's very, very hard to manage it. And cryptographic protocols generally are not stateless. They're very, very stateful, and they need to be. And if you just do it naively, then they should completely break.
Yeah.
So doing that research to make it so that we can make it stateless, and building out the protocols for that, I think that's a major addition to the system that we're building. So we're always, again, I said beforehand, we're always looking at how do we make it more and more secure. So like running the MPC participants in the TEE, and here adding the offline participant, the actual active MPC participant. That's a lot of like, it might sound like a small thing, but this is like many months of probably even close to a year of research that is going into that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I'll give you one last opportunity. Is there anything we should keep our eyes out for? Any releases, any reveals coming soon that
recently
we need to look at?
Recently released an open source library for our MPC engine. It's called CB MPC, or CB-MPC, and it's based on our production MPC engine. It's not exactly the same, because the MPC engine we're actually using in production has very specific flows, and here we wanted to make it a general purpose library. It's MIT licensed, so it's free for anybody to use for anything whatsoever. And we really want people to use it. Our aim is that, where our belief is that any break to any company in the crypto space is bad for the entire field, and therefore bad for Coinbase as well. So we want people to use it. We understand that many MPC is recognized as the right solution in many cases, but it's very hard to get the amount of MPC expertise you need to do it properly. So we've done it, and it's a production level library that enables you to do key generation, publicly verifiable backup that I talked about, signing for ECDSA for any number of parties, and with thresholds and so on and so forth. So that's, I think it's take a look.
And just a reminder, where can we find that?
So it's on Coinbase's GitHub. You can just search CB-MPC Coinbase.
I'll get that link and share it as well. Awesome. Yehuda, thanks so much for your time. You've been an awesome guest. I really appreciate you joining me, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.